Okay, it's 3 o'clock. Hi, everybody. I'm gonna let people into the room as we're speaking, so excuse me if I step away for a second. Here comes Norma. Okay, we should take a moment to acknowledge the land on which we are gathered for this meeting. For thousands of years, this land has been the home of the Patwin people, including the Yocha Dehe Winta Nation today. The Patwin people have remained committed to the stewardship of this land over many centuries. It has been cherished and protected as elders have instructed the young through generations. We are honored and grateful to be gathered here today on their traditional lands. And I'm going to pass this over to Mike, and he's going to introduce Janey.
Okay, well, thank you, Joan, and welcome everybody. It's really nice to see as many people here today. It really is encouraging for the presenters to have folks to talk to. Even if we're doing it virtually, it still makes a difference. So thanks for coming, and I wanted uh, to welcome Janey. If you've seen one of her presentations before, you know that not only is the information really good, but the presentation is also interesting and well done. So Janey is a master gardener from Yolo County, has a lot of background and information. So Janey, I'll let you take it from there.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you for that very, very nice introduction. Yes, my name is Janey Santos. I'm a home gardener, master gardener, and basically obsessed with flowers. So I love talking about seed starting, and not everybody loves hearing about it. So it's great to have like-minded people here. I'm not as technically oriented with this, so if something happens with the slides or something, just make sure to say, I'm sure Joan will catch it. I do have some things here to show you guys. So if you can you guys let me know if you can see my face as well as okay, Joan's shaking her head. Yeah. I have my presentation, and then I have, of course, some other things that I'll show you guys. And then I'm open to questions because this is a lot of information. You know, seed starting, we could just go deeper and deeper and deeper. There's so much to learn about seed starting and so many methods. So I just tried to limit it to just three methods of seed starting, and probably my three favorite ones. And I think I consider the three most successful methods of seed starting. So for today's workshop, we're going to explore seed starting methods for a successful garden. And those methods that I'm going to talk about are soil blocking, traditional cell trays, and then of course direct sowing. So first question, why start seeds? I think the biggest thing for people to start seeds, other than the joy that you get and the bragging rights that you get when you plant a plant and someone compliments you and you can say, oh, I started that from seed, right? That's probably the number one reason to start seeds. But cost savings is huge over nursery plants. You can purchase one packet of seeds for $3 to $5, and depending on what seed you have, you can get 10, 20, 30, up to 100 plants from one packet of seeds. It does take a little bit more elbow grease than just going to the garden center and buying a plant. But the cost savings are just absolutely incredible. Now, I do say that with an asterisk because sometimes there's some investment that needs to be made into seed starting. If you all can see behind me, I have my seed starting setup back here that I actually did kind of budget DIY, but it was an investment to get all this stuff set up. So that's something that does factor into the cost saving benefits over nursery plants. Another really, really great benefit of starting seeds is the greater variety that you can get. There are so many cool seeds that you can purchase online, you can purchase at your local garden centers, you can swap with other gardeners. You like opportunities are endless with the amount of plants that you can grow from seed. We have in Petaluma, California, just real close to us, we have Baker Creek, which has the most interesting seeds. It's just crazy. Over in Santa Rosa, there's Swallowtail Seed Company. They have beautiful seeds that are really, really great for our environment. There's so many varieties that you can basically choose, and every year these seed companies are coming out with new varieties that are, all the rage. And so it just makes it really, really fun. You can really have a very varied garden in your vegetables, in your perennials, and in your annuals. And seed starting makes it really fun. Another benefit to starting seeds is that you actually have control over your growing conditions. Whether you're really concerned about the organic nature of your vegetables that you're growing, your edibles that you're growing, or even the outcome of some of your plants. If you are focusing on growing flowers for a cut flower garden for a bouquet, you want to make sure that you have nice long stems so that you can cut it and it can actually go in a vase. When we purchase plants from garden centers, we don't know if they've been sprayed with something that limits the growth of plants because in garden centers, the key thing for them is to be able to fit as many plants as they can onto their shelves. And so not having tall plants is really important for a lot of garden centers. So you're not always going to find those beautiful tall plants that you can use in your cut flower bouquets. If you go and get the plants, that's where the seeds come in. Finally, you have an extended growing season. You can store your seeds whenever you want. You can basically start them whenever you want. I've done a presentation on the cool flower method before, which is basically where you, instead of sowing your seeds in the spring and planting them out after our last frost, you actually sow your seeds in the summer and then plant them out 5 or 6 weeks before your first frost. So I'm talking about Halloween is when I plant out a lot of my seeds for my cut flower garden. And that extends my growing season and allows those plants to grow over the winter. And then early spring, we start seeing growth and we get blooms even earlier. So it definitely can extend our growing season, which is great for us who live in, zone 9B, and our growing season is so long. Sometimes it's longer than what the garden centers can provide to us. Okay, so let's first talk about seed starting essentials, the things that you need. And this is kind of what I was talking about in that there's a little bit of upfront investment. There are plenty of ways that you can do it super budget and, really bare bones. And then there are ways that you can get up to like $5,000 seed starting stations, which is crazy, but they're beautiful. And I wish I had one. So first thing I'm going to talk about is seeds. So quality seeds suited to our specific climate. And I say this because those of us here in California, we have a very different climate than, people who live on the East Coast or people who live in the southern states like Florida and Georgia. There are certain plants that do really well for us that are not going to do really well for other places. And when we purchase seeds, we want to make sure that those seeds are going to germinate well with our climate, that they're going to grow well with our climate, and they're going to be able to handle our heat and sometimes even our lack of water. So searching out seeds that are going to be well suited to our climate is really important. So these are just a couple of examples, right? There are so many seed starting companies, and you can kind of find which one works best. Renee's Garden is located over to the coast, like Santa Cruz area. I want to say that's where she gets a lot of her seeds from. The one in the middle, that's swallowtail seeds from Santa Rosa. So obviously Santa Rosa is a pretty similar climate to us, excuse me. So those seeds do really well. And then of course Johnny's. Johnny's is in Maine. However, their seeds are really well suited to a variety of climates, and so they tend to work really well. Now, whatever gardener you talk to, they're going to tell you their favorite seeds and the seeds that tend to grow the best for them. So play with it, find different seeds, talk to different gardeners, see which ones work the best. And when I say work the best, I'm talking about the germination rate. And the germination rate is how many of those seeds actually sprout and become a plant. And I'm also talking about how well those seeds will grow in our climate. Are they going to be able to handle our climate, or is the heat going to kill them or something like that? So there's all these things that you kind of need to think about, but just really looking for the best seeds for our climate is really important. Next thing you need is a seed starting mix. And a seed starting mix is a light, well-draining, usually soilless mix. And this is really important to start your seeds with a seed starting mix and not a potting mix. Ask me how I know. It's super important. It's also, of course, really important not to just go out into your garden and scoop up some garden soil and try and start your seeds in something like that, because it's not going to work very well. So You can go to the garden center, you can go to Amazon, and you can get something that says seed starter, seed starting mix on it. And you'll know that that's going to be a good medium to grow your seeds in. You can also get really interesting compressed, compacted. These are usually coconut coir blocks or little discs that when you add water to it, it expands and it gives your seeds a medium to grow in. Now, I'm going to fully admit that I'm biased because I love seed starting and I do it all the time. I'm not a huge fan of these because it's a pain in the you know what to get them to expand. You have to use warm water. You have to, it takes a while. However, if you can't make it to the store and you need to purchase something online and have it sent to you, these are really good options to have them sent to you. So this is something that you can definitely go for. If you want to go a little bit more budget, and I'm going to amend that statement in just a little bit. But if you want to do a DIY recipe for seed starting mix, there's, a ton of DIY recipes you can find online, and they're usually somewhat equal parts of cocoa coir, perlite, and vermiculite. So cocoa coir is the outside of coconuts. We used to use peat moss a lot in seed starting mix. However, peat bogs are endangered and, we want to use peat-free soil from now on. So cocoa coir kind of takes the part of peat moss from now on. And then also you can always add in a handful of worm castings, which is of course optional. So these are kind of the recipes that you can find online to say, save money, make your own seed starting mix. However, perlite costs a lot of money and vermiculite costs a lot of money, and so does cocoa coir. So you kind of just have to kind of judge it. If you are a flower farmer or a veggie farmer and you're going to be going through an absolute huge amount of seed starting mix, this might be budget wise for you. But if you're only kind of like a home gardener and seed starting at home, going back to one of those pre-made mixes might be the best thing for you. So kind of just play with it, and see kind of what works best for you. For those of you who don't know, perlite and vermiculite, those are two, they're like volcanic rocks that puff up and they hold moisture. And so it just basically lightens the material and makes it so that it's easier for those baby seed roots to go through and expand and make their way through the seed starting mix. So as I was saying, potting soil versus seed starting mix, it's a big difference. You can start seeds in potting soil. You can sift the potting soil to get out all of the big chunks of things, and you can use potting soil. However, your success rate might decrease, and there's a couple reasons. Some potting soils contain fertilizer, and fertilizers can actually burn baby seedlings. They can't handle that, and they can't handle the fertilizer touching their new stems and their baby roots and everything like that. And so not knowing what's in your potting soil can cause burning on your new baby seedlings. Also, some potting soil has too much clay and it can actually hold too much moisture for those baby seedlings, which I know sounds crazy because we want to keep our seed starting mix moist until the seeds germinate, but too much moisture can definitely harm your seeds. Like I was saying, there can be large chunks of organic debris like sticks or like little pieces of bark, and that's going to make it a lot harder for those roots to get through. Also, it's going to make it a lot harder for the seeds to come in contact with the seed starting mix to actually get started with germination. So even the very first step, germination, where the outer shell of the seed breaks open, that might not even work if you're using something like potting soil or garden soil. I think the biggest reason, hands down, the biggest reason to use seed starting mix versus potting soil is seed starting mix is a sterile medium. That means it doesn't have any bacteria in it. It doesn't have any fungus in it. It's clean. So you're not going to get what's called damping off. And damping off is a condition where seeds will germinate and they'll grow up. And then all of a sudden it'll look like they melted and they'll just kind of fall over. And you'll just look at your seedlings seedlings and think, what did I do? Did I overwater? Did I underwater? Was it not getting enough light? Was it getting too much light? And what it was is it was just basically an infection of fungus, and it was damping off. And it's a really common thing that happens with seedlings, and using potting soil or non-sterile soil mixes are one of the biggest reasons to cause from damping off. Also, too much moisture with humidity domes can cause damping off as well. All right, so more essentials. We're talking about containers, and there are so many different types of containers. Like, I couldn't even get enough pictures to show you all. So you can see over on the left, we have cell trays, and cell trays are usually plastic. Sometimes they're biodegradable, but they're just basically what it sounds like. It's trays that you can put your seed starting mix into, and then you can divide up your seedlings, plant 1 or 2 seeds in each cell tray and let it grow. Then there are cheaper ways that you can do it. You can see on the top right, we have, egg cartons, and everybody has an egg carton. Well, maybe not now because of what's going on with eggs, but lots of people have egg cartons, or yogurt cartons work really well. Pretty much anything that has a drainage hole that you can hold soil is something that can hold seeds. I like using blueberry trays. I like using strawberry trays, the little clamshell trays. I think that those work really, really well. Plus, those have a built-in humidity dome, and humidity domes really help with that germination process to get the seed to break dormancy and start growing. Down on the bottom right, I want to show you guys those are actually called soil blocks. And I'm going to get into those a little bit more, but you can see they differ from the traditional trays in that they're not divided by anything. They're just kind of molded into blocks where you can start your own seeds. And that's a really, really interesting technique that can save money and definitely save space. So that's an interesting way to do it. The one thing you do need is you need that bottom tray for them to sit in. And actually what they're showing here in the bottom right, they're showing a tray that's actually perforated, and that won't work. And I'll explain to you guys why that doesn't work very well for soil blocking. But just something to kind of look at, that you do need a tray for your soil blocking. And then of course in the middle, oh, sorry, I don't know how I went forward. In the middle, I had direct sowing, and direct sowing, you don't need a tray, which makes it really easy, but it has its own issues. So then the next essential thing you need for seed starting is, of course, a light source. So you can always use sunlight, right? You can always use a bright window. But I truly think better if you're going to start seeds indoors and you're going to start seeds early where the sun is not at its strongest during the year, having some supplemental seed starting light is really, really helpful. And you can see a picture of that on the left. If you can see me and you see my screen right behind me, I have a shelf, and I actually have shop lights. So I went to Walmart. I bought shop lights, and I just made sure that the lumens, the strength of the shop light, was high enough to mimic sunlight so that I could use those as my seed starting lights. And that allows your lights, or that allows your seedlings to get the light that they need, especially when we haven't quite hit daylight savings time yet and there's not as much sun as we need them to have. So one of the biggest ways that people can fail with seed starting indoors is not having enough light. And you can tell that it doesn't have enough light if your seedlings are very leggy, and leggy means they're very tall, they're kind of stretching for the light. There's really no way to come back from a leggy seedling. You have to start over, unfortunately. A lot of people will say that you can kind of fix it by burying it a little bit deeper, but it doesn't work. It just leads to a weaker plant in the long run. So making sure that you have some really good light source very close to the plant right as soon as they germinate is what's going to allow you to have nice, strong plants to grow. Okay. Any questions so far, Joan? Nothing? Okay, good. All right. So the 3 methods, like I said, I'm going to talk about today are traditional cell trays, soil blocking, and direct sowing. And so let's start with traditional cell trays. So the definition of traditional cell trays is seeds that are started in individual plastic or biodegradable trays. And so I kind of went over this a little bit. These are probably the cheapest option that you can find. They're pretty cheap to go find them at, the big box store or a garden center to find these plastic trays here. Like I said, you can use yogurt containers, you can use egg tray or egg cartons. There's so many things that you can use that basically you just pack in the seed starting mix, and then that's where you plant your seeds. So I do have a video. And what I'm showing here, this black tray right here, it's technically called a tidy tray, and it makes it really, really easy that I could put my seed starting mix. And the reason why I want to put it in there is because I actually want to pre-moisten my soil before I put them in my cell trays. And so this soil right here is the consistency of a wet sponge. So if I was to squeeze it really hard, a couple drops would come out. And that's how I know that my seed starting mix is well saturated, but not too saturated for the traditional cell tray method. Then you can see here, I am dropping the cell tray down. And the reason why I'm doing that is I'm making sure that any air pockets are gone outside or gone out of that cell tray. So you can see after I dropped it, the level of the soil dropped down, and that meant that there was air pockets in there. And if you have air pockets in your cell trays, that's when you're going to start seeing issues in your seedlings, and you won't really understand why. And when you water them, it's going to kind of drop down, and you're going to have issues with having enough soil in your cell trays. So just making sure you pre-moisten it, you drop it down a couple times, and you fill it up is going to really, really help success for when you are filling up your traditional cell trays. So like I was saying, tips for success, pre-moisten your soil prior to sowing. And trust me on this, I've been lazy and I haven't pre-moistened my soil, and I thought, okay, well, I'm going to put it in first and then I'm going to water it. It doesn't work. It's really, really hard to get it all evenly moist. It's so much easier to pre-moisten it before and have a tray like that. I used to get a 5-gallon bucket and pre-moisten my seed starting mix in the bucket before I filled them into the trays. That was a way that I could do it really easily. Now I have that tidy tray, and that makes it a little bit easier. So just find what works for you, but pre-moistening the seed starting mix is really important. The other thing is to transplant your seedlings before they become root bound. So what can happen is these cell trays, there's nowhere for the roots to go as they grow. So if you leave them in their cell trays for too long, the roots are just going to circle on each other, and it makes it really hard for those roots to all of a sudden start growing the way that they need to once you transplant them. One really great thing is, if you guys can see my video of me, this is a really good example of a cell tray. And if you can see on the edge, they have these open grooves right here. And these open grooves, the reason for those is for something called air pruning. And air pruning is a technique that we can use to prevent the seedlings from becoming root bound, because as the roots hit these air slits here, the roots actually are air pruned off. The roots will actually die off. And that sounds like a bad thing. That sounds like, oh, I don't want my roots to die off. But actually, they're dying off as they're going in the correct direction. And that's exactly what you want, because as soon as you transplant that seedling into the ground or into the pot, wherever you're moving it next, those roots are just going to continue growing in the same way. So they have found that this air pruning kind of openings on the side of these traditional cell trays are so much more beneficial for seed starting in plastic cell trays or other type of material. So if you find cell trays that do have these little grooves on it or openings, again, those are for air pruning, and they're actually really, really beneficial. And I'll talk more about that when we talk about soil blocking, because that does a really great job of air pruning as well. Another tip for success for traditional cell trays is to use a heat mat and grow lights for strongest growth. So I've already talked a little bit about why grow lights are super important, prevent legginess, get really, really strong plants. A heat mat is another way that can really, really help you work these guys and get these guys to germinate really well. Now, heat mats you don't want to use for too long. A heat mat is a heated mat that will actually increase the temperature of the soil only to about 10 degrees above air temperature. So it doesn't It doesn't increase the temperature a ton, but it increases it enough that that seed can germinate a little bit quicker, and it allows for more success because the process is kind of sped up a little bit. So it avoids the errors that can occur with the environment, too much water or not enough water, or it got disturbed because of something. When you have a heat mat, it just starts that reaction that much faster, and it just allows for a little bit more success. And if you're in a rush, heat mats help a lot. The problem is that you don't want to leave heat mats on for too long because they can work really, really well, and they can actually cause the seedling to stretch, just like lack of light can cause the seedling to stretch. Too much heat can cause the seedling to grow just too quickly, and then it becomes too leggy and it can't support itself. And it's just this really tall, gangly thing that's not a very strong plant. So you really only want to use heat mats until you see your seeds germinate, and then you take it off the heat mat. The last tip for success I have for traditional cell trays is to use bottom watering to avoid disturbing delicate seedlings. And I'll show you in a little bit bottom watering, but basically bottom watering is where you have the cell trays in a watering tray that doesn't leak, and you water from the bottom, and basically the seedlings suck the water up from the bottom up. And that allows, if you have delicate seeds, some seeds you just want to press into the top of the soil based on what the back of the seed packet says. Um, if you disturb those seeds because you poured water on it from a watering tray, or you used a spray that was too strong, you can cause that seed to, fly off basically. And so bottom watering really, really helps, and it really makes a big difference, and it avoids overwatering, which is definitely a cause for failure of seed starting. So I really like bottom watering when I'm doing cell trays. So the pros of traditional cell trays are they're really easy to load. They're really easy to put in there. The soil's easy to put in. There's often less watering as compared to the soil blocking method that I'll show you next. It's readily available. You can get these pretty much anywhere. And if you don't want to spend money, again, yogurt cups or those red solo cups, those work well. Pretty much anything that can hold soil and has a drainage hole will work well. And then there can be less need to pot up. And what that means is if the plant grows too quickly and it starts to get root bound, you need to put it into a bigger pot. Sometimes we can start with a big enough tray that we don't really need to do that as much as other methods. The cons to cell trays are this: plastic waste, right? And if you don't reuse this, it's a complete waste of plastic. So, when you purchase them, just try your best to take care of them so we're not wasting plastic and we're not adding to landfills. But that is one con definitely for cell trays, is that there's so much plastic use in this. It can cause root binding, especially if you don't have those air pruning slits, and it can take a lot of space. A lot of us only have so much space on our seed starting shelves, or the amount of space we have by a bright window, and using these cell trays takes a lot of space as compared to other methods. Okay, so next method we have is soil blocking. So soil blocks are compressed blocks of soil as a planting medium. You can see on the left here, here's an example of big soil blocks. And on your soil blocker, you can put in little squares that fit the size of small soil blocks. And so as you want to pot up your small soil blocks, you can just fit them into those little indents, and then you've potted up your seedling. So you can see on the right, we have the big soil blocker. It's the 4-cell one, and then the smaller soil blocker, which you want to start your small seedlings in. And that's what I actually mainly use. So you can see right here, here's my soil blocker. So this has 20 seedlings, and you can see the size of it. 20 seedlings versus 6, right? So it's a huge difference. And if you're going to start something that's a very slow grower, like digitalis, foxglove is a very slow grower and it takes a really long time to get going, you're going to be wasting a ton of space underneath grow lights if you use something like this for digitalis. Whereas you're going to be able to fit 20 plants in this small space, no big deal, right? Then this is the bigger size soil blocker that you can get. And when When you want the indents, you can just they just slide into those spots right there. But these make bigger soil blocks, and these would be for something like corn or tomatoes or sunflowers, plants that grow really, really fast that aren't going to fit in these small ones. And then finally, we have this tray, and you can see this tray that I put here on the slide is a solid tray, because the way that you're going to water these soil blocks is by bottom watering, and so you need a place for the tray to catch the water, and you'll see a video on that in a little bit. So this next video I have coming up is going to show you the difference in the moisture level of the seed starting mix. So first thing I have to say is, for my soil blocks, I like to use regular seed starting mix. There are so many people out there that will say, no, you need a special soil blocking recipe. I personally don't think you need that. I don't think it's necessary, and I already have seed starting mix, so I like using seed starting mix. The problem, or the key, though, is that you have to make sure it has enough moisture to it, because that's the only way that the medium is going to stay into those blocks. So you can see how much water I've actually added to my seed starting mix, where it is so wet, it is absolutely dripping with water. And then the other thing that I like to do is I actually like to leave it there so that the cocoa coir or the peat moss, whatever's in there, is actually soaking up even more of the water. So everything gets completely soaked. And then when I actually make my soil blocks, I know that they're going to stay in that mold, and it's going to be able to handle me putting a seed in there and not crumble and fall apart. So having a tray like this is really, really key for using the soil blockers, because the way that you do it is you push down on the soil just like I'm doing, and you want to push hard. So it's kind of funny, because in the traditional seed starting method with the cell trays, I don't want to push on it because I don't want to compact the soil. That's why I dropped it down on the ground. With the soil blocking method, you actually want to really compact it and push hard. And so you can see I did that with my soil blocker, and then as I release it, I'm left with 20 soil blocks that are going to sit there, and I can sow them, and each spot is going to have its little cell. Now you can see the openings on every single soil block. That is going to give you that air pruning that I was talking about with the traditional cell trays. No longer do we have to worry about just a couple slits in each cell. Every single side of a soil block is air pruning, right? Which is one of the reasons why people say it's such a fantastic method. And it makes it so that these plants are supposed to grow a lot stronger, a lot faster, be a lot healthier because of the roots. So here you can see some of my soil blocks. This was from a couple years ago, but you can see this is how you want to water your soil blocks. The drawback to a soil blocking method is that they need so much water. Like, you have to water them absolutely every single day, no matter what. And this is how you water them. You pour the water gently into the bottom of the tray, and you let them soak it up from the bottom, just like you would do bottom watering. And then you pour the excess water up, or excuse me, water off. But you can imagine all of that surface area that we have with these soil blocks, the water is going to evaporate so much more quickly. These guys are going to dry out so much more quickly than the traditional way, just because we don't have that plastic, or we don't have that yogurt container that's keeping the water in. So a lot of people say that that is an absolute benefit of soil blocking, because they dry out very quickly, and you can just kind of keep the process going. Some people think that that is just an absolute pain, and it's really hard to keep it going. I can say that I have a hard time remembering to water them all the time. And so you have to be really, really careful if you're going to commit to soil blocking, because, 8 weeks of work can go down the drain because you forgot one day. So, pros of soil blocking: after you have purchased your soil blocker and your trays and your seed starting mix, other than that, it's pretty inexpensive. You don't have to pay for it that much. You can do hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of seedlings for nothing because you have your soil blocker and you don't have to worry about it. And that is why a lot of flower farmers like to use soil blocking method because it is actually a lot less expensive. Doesn't waste any plastic other than the cell tray or the trays that you're using. You can start incredible amounts of seeds in a very, very small space. I mean, it's absolutely incredible the difference that you can do. And then, of course, that root pruning technique is really, really helpful for strong root development for your seedlings. The cons, like I was saying, you have to water daily. You cannot forget. It's crazy how fast these guys will dry out. And there is kind of a high cost of entry. If you don't have someone you can borrow a soil blocker from, my friends, they all borrow my soil blocker from me. But if you don't have somebody, then you gotta purchase that, and they can be kind of expensive, depending on which one you purchase. It does take practice. I always like to tell people practice making soil blocks before you actually sit down and make your soil blocks because you have to figure out how to get it right, how to get them to stay together, how much moisture to put in your seed starting mix or your soil blocking mix. It definitely does take practice, but once you get the hang of it, you can do it like it's no problem. You might need to pot up your seedlings faster depending on what seeds you start. If you use the small soil blocker, these are very, very tiny. They're about 3/4 of an inch, I think. Don't quote me on that, but they're very small. So they can grow pretty quickly. And if you are not planning to plant something out pretty quickly, the space saving benefit might not be enough for you. And then the other con is larger seeds don't really work with this method. You can use this big soil blocker for larger seeds, but sometimes there's even larger seeds like pumpkins or like gourds, zucchinis. I won't use the soil blocker because it just grows too fast. It's just not worth it. Okay, so tips for success for soil blocking. Soil moisture consistency is key. This took me a really, really long time to learn. I always like to err on the side of more wet than less wet because that will actually really help your soil blocks stay together. If you notice your soil blocks are crumbling apart, especially as you're sowing the seeds and pushing the seeds down into the blocks, you probably haven't put enough water into your medium. Practice making the blocks. You have to practice. It's a tough technique to learn at first, but you'll get it. Water consistently. That's just something you can't forget with this method. And then also one thing I want you guys to think about is don't overseed. Sometimes I'm super lazy and I like to overseed, especially if the seeds are super, super small. And sometimes I'll just kind of sprinkle them all over it. Well, the problem is when you go to thin out a soil block, you are not only going just on the top, you're trying to thin out on all sides of that cube, and it becomes an absolute mess very quickly. So if you like to overseed, I would recommend probably going with the traditional method because then you only have one surface that you have to thin out. If you're going to overseed on a soil blocker, good luck. I've done it before. I've given up before, actually. So the third method that I'm going to talk to you guys about is the direct sowing method. And this is planting seeds directly into the garden soil. This is obviously going to be the cheapest and the easiest method that you can do. This is where you prepare the soil in your garden bed and you go directly out and sow this in your garden. The problem is, though, I love this method. It's great. No equipment's needed. It's absolutely free. The plants are waking up in the space where they live, so it makes it really easy. It takes less work because you don't have to worry about watering them every day or transplanting them out or hardening them off. Makes it really easy. However, I tend to fail at this method more than any other method that I do. And that is for a multitude of reasons. Whether it's weather, maybe we've gotten too much rain, maybe we haven't gotten enough rain, maybe it's been too cold for some reason. Pests are a huge thing for me. Birds, oh my goodness, so frustrating, right? But you can do all your work in direct sowing all your seeds, particularly your sunflower seeds, and it can be gone in a day, right? An afternoon, basically. And then, of course, other pests that will come up and might eat eat your baby seedlings as well. You also have less control of where your final plant ends up. And what I mean by that is some people are very particular where they want a nice, beautiful row spaced out 12 inches apart or however much it is apart. And that probably won't happen if you're going to direct sow because maybe some of them won't germinate, some of them won't grow. Maybe there'll be two in this spot, right? So it's harder to make it look really neat, which some gardeners don't care about that, but it's just something to think about. And then the other thing is you'd need to wait until the soil warms up for an appropriate temperature for seeds. Every seed has a specific temperature that it'll germinate at, and our soil temperature isn't going to be warm enough for a lot of those seeds until it gets to a certain part of year. So if you want to kind of mess with Mother Nature a little bit and plant something like a gomphrena, which is a heat-loving plant and won't germinate unless it's hot, you're not going to be able to direct sow a gomphrena until I don't know, June or something like that, right? Because it takes some time for that soil to warm up to make it work. Whereas we can counteract that or we can fake it by growing it inside. So it's just something that you need to think about. So tips for success, keep the soil consistently moist until germination. So I always like to think of carrot seeds when I do this. Carrot seeds are notoriously hard to germinate because they can take 2 to 3 weeks to actually germinate. And so a lot of people have different tips and tricks to keep the soil consistently moist and not have to go outside and water 3 times a day. And sometimes that's putting a layer of burlap on top of the carrot seedlings where you sow the seedlings. Sometimes it's putting a board on top just to prevent evaporation of that soil. So it's just something you want to think about. And however long it takes for these seeds to germinate is how long you're going to have to worry about keeping that soil consistently moist. If you have a problem like I do with birds and they will come and they'll eat all your direct sown seeds, consider barriers. I love those wire cloches. I actually think that they're beautiful in the garden, so I like using things like that. There's also netting that you can use. There's so many things that you can use to keep the critters away and protect your seedlings. Another thing to consider is slug or snail traps or bait to protect the baby seedlings. That's one of the hard things about direct sowing is there's a period of time where those seedlings are going to be really, really tender and tasty for the slugs and snails and other earwigs and everything. And so they could be lunch for them at some point, right? And so maybe putting something down on the ground that can trap them before they get to your direct sown seedlings can definitely help. And then, of course, overseeding can help with your yields because, at least in my case, direct sowing, the yields aren't as high as indoor sowing. So choosing the right methods, there's not one right way to do it. I like to think there are some plants that are better one way and some plants that are better another way. So you just have to kind of decide and see which one works for you. For instance, zinnias are absolutely the easiest flower to sow, and it's 10 times easier just to direct sow them in the ground and protect them with a wire cloche than it is to put them in a cell tray. And even worse, if I was to put them in this small soil blocking tray, I would have to pot them up in 2 days or something like that, right? So you just have to think about what you're sowing, consider your available space and equipment. There was a period of time when I wanted to, or I did a flower field and I did hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of seedlings. And I actually used this one seed starting shelf. And so I used the soil blocking method so that I could do it in a very small space. And I had to use the soil blocking method or else it wouldn't have worked. And then consider the amount of time and effort you're willing to spend, right? And this is even for seed starting in general. All of this, there's a benefit to all of it, but it's also your time and your energy. And so if it's easier for you to just head to the garden center and get a tomato plant, absolutely do that. You know what I mean? It all depends on what works for you. I find that I don't do soil blocking as much just because I have to be so careful about watering. So I tend to do the traditional method most times. Common mistakes are overwatering versus underwatering. I talked about this. Insufficient light leads to leggy seedlings and ignoring the importance of hardening off. This is the last thing I'll talk about. So hardening off is the process of gradually acclimating indoor grown seedlings to outdoor conditions. So if you're going to use the methods of soil blocking or the traditional cell trays, you have to think about the transplant shock that plant is going to have. It's been inside It's had this beautiful, gentle light. It's had perfect temperature, you know, and it's perfectly happy. And then all of a sudden you put it outside and it has all this wind and it has the strong sun, or maybe it has cold at night and it freaks out and it can't handle it. And it's called transplant shock. So when you harden off, which is when you're gradually taking that plant outside for increasing amount of time, what you're actually doing is you're developing the cambium layer. Think of it as the bark of the seedling, which it's not the bark, it's just the outer layer of the seedling. When you gradually have it outside more often, it's developing that cambium layer, and that cambium layer is what's going to allow that seedling to withstand wind and temperatures. And you might not be able to notice that anything is wrong with the seedling, but over the season, you're going to notice that that plant isn't going to perform as well as it could have. And that's usually because it wasn't hardened off properly and it basically went into shock and it got set back a couple weeks. And if a plant gets set back a couple weeks, it makes it susceptible to infection or bugs or anything like that. So just remember to harden off your seedlings if you're going to do seed starting indoors. Try multiple methods to see what works for you. Again, this workshop is not to say one method is better than the other. There's just a variety of methods that you can try, and I only went over 3. There's a ton of them. Keep a seed starting journal to make notes for yourself and say, this worked, this didn't work. Keep a calendar to track your success and plan ahead. Thank you guys. I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I'm open for questions if anyone has a question.
You had a comment and then some questions.
Okay.
FYI, March 15th, free compost in Benicia. Sign up at republicservices.com.
Right.
And then first question is, do you need to keep the light on at night?
No, you don't. There is different varying amounts of how long you have to have the light for, but the usual recommendation is 16 hours.
How
16 hours on.
how difficult is it to put plants in small soil blocks?
To put plants in small soil blocks or seeds in small soil blocks?
That was Ward. Ward, are you here?
I meant seeds.
Okay.
Seeds.
It seemed like they're tiny little blocks
Oh
of
my gosh, it's Ward, it's so difficult. It's really it's really difficult. So, when you make the soil block, it does come with a little bit of an indent that you can put the seeds into. And what I like to do is I like to get a toothpick and I will actually make a little hole with the toothpick and then put the seed in and then actually put vermiculite over my soil block. That's a really easy way to do it. But it's not an easy technique. I would say for these tiny soil blocks, that's when you're going for those dust-like seeds, those really, really small seeds that you can kind of just easily push it down into. If you're going to use a bigger seed at like pretty much any veggie seed that I can think of off the top of my head, except for carrot, which, you know, is its own beast. But you want to use the bigger soil block or you want to use something else. So it's a technique that you have to practice and you have to work on. Using a toothpick helps a lot, and then making sure that you have enough moisture in the soil blocks to make sure it doesn't immediately crumble apart when you push the seed down in.
Thank
What
you.
what is a wire cloche or plastic cloche with closable opening on top?
What is it? So a wire cloche. Um, so a wire gardening cloche is just like chicken wire shaped. Sorry, I'm trying to show it for you guys. It's like chicken wire shaped things that you can just kind of put on top of your seedling. Um, sorry, hold on. I got the best benefit. So can you guys see that right there? So
Hmm.
just kind of like a wire cloche that you can put on top of your seedling just to kind of protect it. They have bigger ones that, yes, do open and close so that you can kind of reach in. And that's going to protect it from critters, whether it be from birds or raccoons or chickens kind of digging around, or a dog or a cat or something like that. That's going to protect your seedling to make sure that it doesn't get damaged while it's still growing.
How can we tell if the seeds are appropriate for our region? Will the seed seller always know this?
No, the seed seller will not always know that. And sometimes they will say it's appropriate for our region and it's actually not. Trial and error is probably the best way. You'll learn very quickly. Like talk to different gardeners and you'll hear them say, "Oh, I've tried this seed company and it just never works. It never germinates for me. It never does well for me." And you start to learn what seeds work better for your area versus not. So there's no hard and fast rule on whether it's appropriate or not. Like, remember, we can make any plant basically work in our garden, however much we protect it or, you know, shade it or anything like that, right? We can make any plant work. It's just a matter of the healthiest plants are going to be the right plant for the right place. So finding plants that do well in our climate is huge, and I think that a like a really easy way to find that is to find a seed starting company that actually grows their flowers or grows their veggies to harvest the seed in our same climate. And so that's why I like using local rather than, somebody that's from the West or the East Coast or something like that.
How long should warming mat be turned on?
Um, it depends on your seed, right? So if the seed just in general likes warmer temperatures and you just want to kind of get it to germinate, you can leave it on all the time. If you have another seed, like this one actually right in front of me, Verbena bonariensis, which is also purple top verbena, that type of seed likes to get cold at night, which is crazy. Seeds are crazy. But so basically that one I will turn off my heat mat, or I'll actually take my tray off of the heat mat and let it cool down at night and then warm it back up while the lights are on. So the easiest way to know all of this stuff is to order your seeds from a place that has information on the back of the seed packet. You can order your seeds, I'll hide the name of this, but you can order your seeds from somebody, or you can get it at the garden center, and it won't tell you anything on the back of the seed packet. It'll tell you how tall the plant is, does it like sun or shade, and that's pretty much it. Or you can order your seeds from a really good seed company. You might have to spend a little bit more money, but they'll give you so much information like how many days to germinate, what temperature to germinate, how to grow on, what the light and soil requirements are, what the spacing is, the best time to harvest it. It can give you so much information, and it makes all the difference in the world because there are a lot of seeds that are different and have different requirements.
Can you recommend a soil temperature chart for flower seed starting?
Oh, it would be so varied. Again, every seed has a different temperature that it likes, right? And so like if I just grab this is rock rose and it's 70 degrees. This is Cresspedia and it's 75 degrees. There's so many different ones. And so I would say that don't worry about it too much because the majority of them that these seed starting companies are going to sell to you are most likely going to work with room temperature, maybe a little hotter, maybe a little colder. There are some seeds that do need to be stratified. And what stratification means is it needs a period of cold before it'll actually germinate. And they'll tell you, throw it in the freezer for a week before you germinate it or before you sow it. And so more times than not, it's going to be the temperature of your room, maybe a little warmer if you have a seed starting mat. So to answer your question, no, I don't have a chart for seed temperature. I think that's too varied of a question. I think you could figure it out based on what seeds you want to do, but just a general one, I don't have that. Yeah.
Which seeds should be soaked overnight in water prior to planting?
So there's a whole bunch that can be soaked overnight. Usually the rule of thumb is if it has a very hard shell, like sweet peas or like moonflower needs to be soaked overnight, like purple hyacinth bean needs to be soaked overnight. All of those seeds are ones that have really hard, thick shells. And it will tell you on the back of the seed packet, if you get it from a good place, it'll tell you soak these seeds for 12 hours, soak these seeds for 24 hours, nick these seeds with a nail clipper or something like that. And those are ways that can help you get that seed germinated, because normally what that seed goes through is maybe an entire winter of stress and rain and cold, and then all of a sudden in spring it germinates. And so we're trying to copy that indoors, and so that's where the soaking comes in. So if you have a big, thick shelled seed, most likely that needs to be soaked overnight. One of them, called Bells of Ireland, is a really, really beautiful, beautiful seed. And the recommendations on the back of the seed packet are to soak it overnight. And I've tried it and I've journaled and I've, oh, a failure here, failure here. And I finally found the best way for me to germinate that seed. It has such a hard shell that I actually have to put it into a wet paper towel, put it into a plastic baggie, and put that into the fridge for a couple days. And that's how I can get that seed to germinate. And I only learned that just from trial and error. And it just took me some time to figure out that, man, this seed really needs a whole bunch of moisture and a whole bunch of cold to be able to germinate. So you can do like kind of like a deep dive if you're having trouble with seeds, but everything is so varied, especially when it comes to flowers and perennials. It takes some learning, and you can kind of eventually you'll learn enough that you can look at the seed and you can say, oh, that has such a thick shell, that one I probably need to soak overnight. Double check. You can even try and do it if it works or if it doesn't do it. I just soaked moonflower seeds. It recommended 12 hours in warm water, and I did 24 hours in cold water, and I over soaked it. They were mush at the end, so I had to buy another packet, and I had to do it what the instructions said. But it's fun to just kind of play with it and see what you can do.
You have three more questions. If
Okay.
you make your own soil, what are the ratio of the medium?
It depends. It's like a recipe, right? And so you can find anything on the internet, and someone will say, oh, it's 1.5 to 1. Like anybody is going to tell you exactly what it has to be. It's what you like, right? And technically it's what you like. So what I showed you, that recipe was equal parts vermiculite, perlite, and cocoa coir, and then maybe like a handful of earthworm castings thrown in, which is totally optional. You don't even need to do that. But it's basically equal parts. But again, you can find on the internet, everybody is going to say something different. And then some people will even add in this crazy stuff that you have to special order and stuff like that. So if you're going to mix it yourself, start with equal parts, see how you like it. Does this feel extra dry? Do I have to water this too much? Is this, is it holding too much of my water? And it really depends on whatever tray you're using or soil block you're using, whatever your seed starting setup is. Everything is so variable. So you just have to find what works for you. And the perfect example with that is, I read all these recipes on soil blocks, and the special recipe that I needed to make for soil blocks, well, I found regular seed starting mix worked absolutely perfectly. There are some seed starting mixes that I don't like and I will not buy. And then there are some that I love, and I will actually drive a little bit further just because I want those. But that is my own personal thing. You have to find out what works for you.
Do you have any experience with reusable silicone seed cell trays?
Yes, I do. I think they're great. I think, again, they're an investment, right? Um, The only ones that I've ever had, they don't have the air pruning slits in them, and I could totally be wrong with that. They might have those now, but the ones that I used to have didn't have the air pruning slits, and so I stopped using those. They work well. They are I think that they put a lot of emphasis on how easy it is to get them out, right? To get the cell tray out, because you can just kind of pop them out. Um, and I think that if that's something that's important to you, then that's great. Again, it's really preference and what you like the most. And if those silicone cell trays are your jam, then go with that for sure.
Last question. For light, what strength and type of bulb should we use?
So I'm assuming you're saying grow light. You can go to the store, you can go to Amazon, and you can buy a quote grow light. I don't know if you guys can see, but down low, I have this grow light that's kind of a pinky shade, and that's just a different spectrum of light that helps with different vegetative growth and stuff like that. Those lights are so expensive. I mean, they're like so expensive. Um, so I've read a couple places that you can go to a hardware store or like Walmart and you can get a shop light, which is what these guys are, right? And the important thing is the lumens, or yeah, the Kelvin, the K, and you want to get the K as high as you possibly can. So it has to be about normal is 2200. That's too low. That is you have to get the stronger light. And so 4000 is better and 5000 K is even better. So if you can find a 5000 K shop light, they're usually about $30 to $40, right? They're just kind of hard to find because you got to find the bright one. If you can find that, that works perfectly well. Maybe not as well as the fancy pink seed starting light that I have here, but I'm using both and I use them both interchangeably. I don't err towards the fancy plant light. One thing I do have to say is when I use my shop lights, I have to make sure that they're close enough to my seeds. They can't be too far away from my seeds because I need to make sure the seeds have the strength of the light that I need. So look for one that's 5000 K, just a shop light at Walmart, basically.
That's it.
Okay. All right. Thank you all. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you, Janey. That was a lot of information. So
Sorry.
now we can all go out and hopefully start some seeds. Next next session, which is March 13th, Peggy Smith, who's a master gardener for Yolo County, and you may remember has talked a number of times on these sessions. We'll talk about strategies for success. So tips, tricks, and whatever else you may need to be successful in your gardening. And then the session after that, which is March 27th, Janet Gard and Joy Sakai, who are both, again, YOLO Master Gardeners, are going to talk about composting. So Janie mentioned worm composting. They're actually going to do that later in the year. This is going to be kind of more traditional composting, but as you probably know, composting is gardener's gold. So it's certainly good to know how to make our own. So anyhow, thanks for coming, everybody. Enjoy your gardening and see you in a couple of weeks.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you so much.